Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome board members, Dr. Sara Morrison, Commissioner Schwinn, who I believe is joining us, Mr. Mike Krause, members of the State Board team, our partners with the Tennessee Department of Education, and all who are joining us today. It is 2 p.m. and I do call this meeting to order. Mr. Casey Griffin on our staff will call a roll to establish a quorum. Mr. Griffin, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Cobbins. Mr. Cobbins. Mr. Darnell.
Here.
Mr. Eby. Here. Mr. Edwards. Mr. Edwards. Mr. Ferguson. Mr. Ferguson. Mr. Jensen. Mr. Jensen. Ms. Cam?
Here.
Mr. Krause?
Here.
Mr. Morrow?
Here.
Madam Chairman Hartgrove?
Here.
Madam Chair, you have 8 members present.
Thank you, Mr. Griffin. We do have a quorum and we are duly convened. And without objection, Gordon Ferguson is excused from this meeting. We're going to move into item 1, which is the statement of necessity provided by Ms. Angie Sanders. I do want to remind everyone when you are presenting to please state your name and title for the record. Thank you. Ms. Sanders.
Thank you, Chairman Hartgrove. My name is Angie Sanders. I'm the General Counsel for the State Board of Education. Pursuant to Tennessee Code Annotated Section 844-108B3, the Tennessee State Board submits this statement of necessity for its special call board meeting held via teleconference at 2 p.m. on April 9, 2020. Pursuant to Public Chapter 652 of 2020 and the Governor's series of executive orders declaring a state of emergency in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, the State Board of Education was tasked with the creation of emergency rules to address issues arising from the statewide closure of public and private schools and post-secondary institutions in the spring of 2019-20. Because of the time-sensitive nature of this issue and the statewide prohibition on in-person gatherings, this special called teleconference meeting was convened to allow the board to consider approval of emergency rules, policies, and permanent rules related to COVID-19. With that, Chairman, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Ms. Sanders. I do have some opening remarks, and I will turn it over to Dr. Sara Morrison and then followed by Commissioner Schwinn. And Mr. Krause, I'm not sure if you have any opening remarks, but I would certainly welcome those from you as well. So I'm going to start by certainly talking about this unprecedented time in our history that's before us as we make important decisions in the form of our votes today regarding emergency rules and policy requirements as a result of COVID-19. For the viewing public, this board has been given the authority through the General Assembly's approval of Public Chapter 652, which allows us to lessen the impact of school closures on various education rules and policies because of COVID-19. It's important for everyone to know that this board stands ready and appropriately nimble should other circumstances warrant additional emergency rules or policies in the future. Now I call on Dr. Sara Morrison for her comments. Dr. Morrison?
Yes, thank you, Chairman Hartgrove. Just a few brief comments from me before we start with the items on the agenda. I wanted to let everyone listening in know how much we appreciate your time and attention to these important matters, and to assure you that the State Board staff and State Board members have spent as much time as humanly possible over the last few weeks really engaging with stakeholders and gathering input on these rules, both before and during the drafting process. We're grateful, extremely grateful to our education partners across the state, particularly working closely with the Department of Education, the Commissioner and her team. Mike Krause at the Higher Ed Commission and his team have been instrumental in helping us to draft these rules to reflect the considerations across our state when it comes to the impact of these school closures. We've also worked with many of our partners in the field, including the Superintendent's Organization, TOSS, our friends at TSBA, the School Boards Association, the AG's office, SCORE, our teacher groups, both TEA and PET, and all the other superintendents and educators and parents who've emailed us over the last few weeks. We appreciate your input on such a fast timeline, and we hope that these rules best reflect much of that feedback in terms of how we move forward as a state. We've also tried very hard to work closely with the General Assembly and the Governor's Office to ensure that the legal authority given to us in the public chapter that Chairman Hartgrove mentioned is appropriately reflected in these rules as well. We've worked to ensure that the things that are appropriate for rule are in rule. We're also working closely with the Department of Education on things that will come out additionally in guidance. We know that these rules can't cover everything that's going to be needed in terms of state direction. And so as Chairman Hartgrove said, we stand ready to come back together, but we also know even within these rules, additional adjustments may be needed in the future, and we'll certainly be looking for additional feedback on these rules as we move forward. We've also attempted across these rules to balance a number of important considerations, both the need for district flexibility wherever possible, with the need for statewide consistency in some instances, like we'll talk about with grading. We know that there are many unique situations for students and teachers across our state right now that require some local discretion. So again, we've really tried to balance that need with the need for statewide consistency in some areas. And then finally, this is really about our students and trying to do our very best as a state board to maintain high expectations and maximize opportunities for student learning. That's paramount. And we want to do that while still accounting for the realities of this current situation. So just a couple thoughts as we talk about these specific rules and the various forms that these decisions take place for our board today. And again, just want to thank everyone that's contributed to the work thus far. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you, Dr. Morrison. I appreciate those comments. Is Commissioner Schwinn with us? I think she has some comments that she wants to share with everyone before we get started. It appears that she may not have been able to join us yet. Mr. Krause, do you have anything that you would like to share?
No, ma'am, none at this time.
Okay, thank you very much. So let's move into the purpose of the meeting. And I do want to remind everyone that all items do require a roll call. Members who make a motion and a second, please state your name for the record. And similarly, if you have a question or a comment during the meeting, please state your name in order to be acknowledged. Thank you. So now let's move into the consent agenda items, and we need a motion to approve the adoption of the agenda. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
Nate Morrow, so moved.
Nate Morrow provides the motion. Is there a second? I'm sorry.
This is Gordon Ferguson. I'll second that motion.
Thank you for joining us, Mr. Ferguson. Mr. Ferguson provides the second. Mr. Griffin, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Cobbin.
Mr. Griffin, thank you.
Mr. Cobbin.
Aye.
Mr. Darnell.
Aye.
Mr. Eby.
Aye.
Mr. Edwards. Mr. Edwards. Mr. Ferguson.
Aye.
Mr. Jensen.
Aye.
Ms. Kim.
Aye.
Mr. Morrow.
Aye.
Madam Chairman?
Aye.
Madam Chairman, you have 9 ayes.
Thank you. The motion to adopt the agenda is approved. Now we'll move into item 3, action items on final reading. Item 3A, COVID-19 emergency rules. I'll turn it over to Ms. Amy Owen and Ms. Angie Sanders.
Thank you, Chairman. This is Angie Sanders, General Counsel for the State Board of Education. I'm going to provide a brief introduction for these emergency rules, and then Amy and I will switch off giving board members a description of each rule as we move through. So as I mentioned earlier, pursuant to Governor Lee's executive orders declaring a state of emergency in Tennessee as a result of tornado damage and the infectious disease COVID-19, as well as Public Chapter 652 of 2020, Myself and Amy Owen are presenting to you all for approval a number of emergency rules to address special circumstances created by the statewide closure of schools in the spring semester of the 2019-20 school year. As Sarah mentioned, these rules were developed by State Board staff in close consultation with the Tennessee Department of Education and numerous stakeholder organizations, including the Tennessee Organization of School Superintendents, Tennessee School Boards Association, Tennessee Higher Education Commission, the Attorney General's Office, and many others. If approved by the State Board today, these rules will be sent to the Attorney General's Office for approval and filed with the Secretary of State's office. Since they are emergency rules, by law, they will go into effect immediately upon filing with the Secretary of State's office and will remain in effect for 180 days. Any provision of these rules that will need to remain in effect beyond the 180 days will need to be included in a permanent rule. And with that, I will pass it over to Amy to review the first item.
Thank you, Angie. This is Amy Owen, Director of Policy and Research for the State Board of Education. The first item that is within this action item is amendments to the administrative rules and regulations, specifically with regard to taking student attendance as a result of the COVID-19 public health emergency this spring semester. The proposed emergency rule states that any school district or public charter school that chooses to provide instruction during this period of school closure, either virtually or via any other form of remote learning, may take attendance only for the purposes of determining which students have access to the instruction and the effectiveness of the remote programming. However, students shall not be given an unexcused absence or reported as truant due to any absences during this period of school closure. We felt this was a necessary clarification because many of our students statewide do not have access to reliable internet service. They may also be taking on additional roles or responsibilities in their families, such as watching younger siblings or things like that during this time when many more students are at home. So we did not want to penalize students via unexcused absences if they were unable to access online or remote instructional options. The next item that is part of this, or the next rule that's part of this item is emergency updates to the minimum requirements for the approval of public schools rule. This is really the meat of a lot of the changes that we're discussing today. This includes sections on the ability of local education authorities to apply for waivers to the commissioner. And based on the legislation that passed this session, the State Board must approve those waivers in order for them to take effect. So we put in place a timeline by which districts may make application to the commissioner. We also modified graduation requirements, or are proposing to do so, for students who are currently in the 12th grade. The proposed requirements would lower from 22 to 20 the number of requirements that seniors this year must earn in order to graduate. They are still required to accrue 4 credits of math, 4 of English language arts, 3 of science, and 2 of social studies. This provides flexibility for students who may be missing 1 or a half credit of a social studies course or another course such as personal finance, world language, or an elective focus. We also are updating policies around student grading, both for students who are currently in the 12th grade as well as for any other students taking high school courses. This proposal would allow students to achieve a grade no lower than what they had in their spring semester course on March 20th, which was the date that the governor requested schools close. However, as LEAs make decisions about providing remote learning options, they may provide ways for students to improve their grades. They may also allow students to participate in remote credit recovery options if they failed their first attempt at a course this spring. I do want to clarify that school districts that have a locally approved grading system may continue to calculate grades and graduation distinctions based on that locally approved system. What we're talking about the board approving is the state uniform grading system, which puts every student in the state on a level playing field for state scholarships like the Hope Scholarship. There are several other provisions to this rule, including several that were contained in the law, such as indicating that we will not have end-of-course exams or any other state assessments this spring, waiving the requirement for seniors this year to pass the civics test, waiving the requirement for students currently in the 11th grade to take the ACT or SAT during this school year, and a number of other different options and provisions. For example, waiving any required professional development trainings or school safety drills that schools are not able to conduct due to this public health emergency. There's quite a lot in that, so are there any questions specifically about that item before we move forward? We can certainly come back to that discussion before the members move to a vote. The next portion, the next emergency rule that is part of this item is the Special Education Programs and Services Rule, which Angie Sanders will discuss.
Thanks, Amy. This rule change extends the time period that LEAs have to complete initial evaluations of students for eligibility for special education by the length of a stay-at-home order governing the LEA. It also allows LEAs that request from the Department of Education an extension of an additional 30 days to complete their evaluations if needed due to extenuating circumstances. The next rule that is under this item is the Individualized Education Account Rule. This rule change. Okay, sorry about that. This rule change clarifies that students participating in the Individualized Education Account Program do not have to take a nationally normed test or the TCAP test if it was scheduled to occur in the spring of the 2019-20 school year. And I'll pass it over to Amy to talk about the next rule around evaluation.
Thank you. The next emergency rule is in regard to evaluations for teachers and school leaders pursuant to the legislation that passed as well as the governor's executive order about the state of emergency. This proposed rule indicates that no overall level of effectiveness for educators shall be calculated for the 2019 school year. Further, any observations that are required by the state board evaluation policy that were not completed this school year prior to the public health emergency shall not be required to be completed. It also indicates, as based in the legislation, that no adverse action may be taken against any student, teacher, administrator, school, or LEA based in whole or in part on any student achievement data from this school year. Included in that are pre-K and kindergarten portfolios and any other type of alternative student growth portfolio models. LEAs may use data from observations conducted prior to the public health emergency to inform local personnel decisions and educator feedback. The next portion of this rule is of emergency rules is around educator licensure. And first, Angie will talk about the effect of the public health emergency on required reporting timelines for directors of schools.
Thanks, Amy. This rule change allows the director of schools to request an extension of the 30-day reporting period that is currently in our rule for submitting a report of educator misconduct to the state board. This is if the director is unable to submit a timely report due to school closures as a result of COVID-19. They would be required to speak with our attorneys who handle licensure discipline to work out a date by which they will be able to submit that report.
Great. And the other, this is Amy Owen again, the other portion of this rule are emergency rules regarding educators who were going to be getting licensed for the first time this summer, completing their educator preparation program. We are proposing to allow them to obtain a provisional license that would be valid from the date of issuance through August 31st, 2021, if they have met all the other requirements for a practitioner license except taking their relevant licensure examination. Several testing centers are closed for different organizations that provide licensure assessments for Tennessee, and we want to make sure students completing their educator preparation program this year are able to obtain a license. If they have that one-year provisional license and complete and pass the appropriate assessments by August 31st, 2021, that provisional practitioner license will be converted to a full practitioner license with 3-year validity. In addition, any educators with a current valid practitioner license that is set to expire this August shall have the validity period of that license extended to August of 2021. They may use that time to complete any required licensure assessments, professional development points, or anything else that was interrupted due to the public health emergency. There's a similar pathway to a provisional license for instructional leaders, folks who are completing their instructional leader preparation program in Tennessee this year. There are also components of this rule that are making some similar accommodations to pathways for out-of-state educators who might be looking to come to Tennessee during this time period while a number of testing centers are closed, and to streamline some of our out-of-state licensing processes generally. That's a follow-up from an item that was on first reading back in November of 2019. The next item I will discuss is also relevant to our educators or our prospective educators. There is a proposed emergency rule regarding educator preparation for candidates who were scheduled to complete their program this spring. Many of them had their clinical experiences, such as student teaching, interrupted or shortened from the required amount of time. And the emergency rule clarifies that they are still eligible for recommendation for licensure by their educator preparation provider. The final decision does rest with the educator preparation provider on whether or not they want to recommend an individual candidate for a license. There may have been other circumstances beyond simply not being able to complete their clinical experience that would hinder someone from being a candidate for a license. So EPPs retain that discretion, but simply having a shortened student teaching or other clinical experience will not be a barrier to folks obtaining a license. And the final portion of the emergency rules to discuss is about non-public schools, and again, Angie will take that portion.
Thanks, Amy. Again, this is Angie Sanders. This last portion of the rule change amends the State Board's non-public school approval process rule to clarify that approved Category 1 and 2 private schools are not required to take the TCAP or a nationally standardized achievement test if that test was scheduled to occur in the spring semester of the 2019-20 school year. Additionally, it clarifies that the 180 instructional day requirement is also waived for Category 1 and 2 private schools, and that any approved private school that's required to meet the same graduation requirements as public schools is also able to utilize the amended graduation requirements for students scheduled to graduate in the 2019-20 school year. With that, I'll hand that back over to Amy.
Thank you. We have addressed the items that are part of this emergency rule set. We are both happy to take any questions from our board members.
Hi, Amy. This is Elisa. Thanks so much for all that rundown. That's very helpful. I have just one question in the teacher prep space. Specifically, can you speak publicly about the the job embedded pathway?
Yes. Are you referring to folks who could be starting a job embedded program this summer?
The people who are in seat now, as well as in the future, both.
Sure. So folks who started a job embedded pathway obtained a license, a 3-year practitioner license, based on either having a major in the content area or passing the Praxis 2 subject assessment for their area. So if somebody began a job embedded program at any point this year, they currently have the 3-year practitioner license and can continue to use it. If they are in that 3rd year and it was set to expire, they will get the 1-year extension. For anybody who would be beginning a job embedded program this summer, who might be in that boat where they have a minor or they have several credit hours but not a major in their content, who would typically need to take the subject-specific assessment. We just learned from some of our licensure assessment providers, specifically education testing services, that they are going to be providing a secure remote option for taking licensure exams. So candidates who are hoping to begin a job-embedded teacher training program this summer will have a route to obtaining the test scores necessary for the practitioner license.
Thank you.
You bet.
Amy, this is Bob Eby, Vice Chair. I've got a question on 0520-0101 evaluations, general requirements for evaluations. The rule does not state anything about prior to this event. This is more of a comment than a question, but I want a clarification. the districts still have the authority and the responsibility for any actions that may have been taken with regard to prior to this event, with regard to handling any issues, et cetera. Correct?
Correct. LEAs have authority over personnel decisions. Angie, would you like to add anything further there?
No, I think the only clarification is just that because there won't be a LOE evaluation score calculated this year, that their decisions obviously couldn't be based on that, but they could use any information that they collected throughout the course of the school year to make personnel decisions.
I think it's important, you know, and we're not putting in the rule, but I think it's important to go on record that at least the districts recognize they still have that authority, and maybe we don't need to, but you know, some people may not recognize that. I think that's important.
This is Nate Morrow, and I would just ask if you could give some of the background and the research that you all have done in regards to the looking at grades, standardized grades, students who want to improve their standing, and how you all came about those, both the grading systems and the recommendation to allow kids to improve, and the effects that has on, like you said, about the Hope Scholarship and those things. Because I know a lot of concern from a lot of parents are looking at how does this affect our future, and there's a lot at stake in those things.
This is Amy. I'm happy to address that, but I think our executive director might also have comments.
Okay.
Sarah, would you like to begin?
Sure, I'm happy to. Thank you for the question, Nate. I agree. When we have been working to draft these rules, the provision around how we ensure parity of student learning while balancing the opportunities that we'd like to see across the state for additional learning wherever possible has been one of the hardest things to figure out. I know Mike Krause is on the call, and he may want to speak to this as well from the higher ed perspective. But in terms of that specific provision that you're asking about in terms of freezing grades as of March 20th for high school credit-bearing courses and allowing districts to provide optionally additional learning opportunities as they're able, we felt, again, back to sort of the opening comments I made, that when you think about how to balance the considerations around a statewide approach with local flexibility, this is a place where we needed a little bit of both. Our state partners in higher education were very clear that for the purpose of post-secondary scholarships, admissions, placement, we need a statewide approach. And so calculating grades as of March 20th felt appropriate. We also don't want to penalize or prevent additional learning where possible across our state, certainly. And those students who could benefit from additional learning opportunities, particularly if they were on the cusp of failing a grade, we want to make sure the districts are positioned to offer those opportunities, whether it's hard copy packets that you're picking up at the school or online learning. It could take a lot of different forms, and certainly that's what we're seeing across our state right now is that learning taking a lot of different forms. So, you know, there's no perfect scenario here. We looked at some other options before landing on this proposal that would have considered pass-fail options. You know, there you've got issues with, you know, again, districts needing or wanting to provide opportunities for students who might be failing, but just barely failing to make a passing grade. So I think we would have been in a similar boat in terms of those optional learning opportunities, even with the pass-fail scenario. Additionally, the pass-fail scenario presents challenges when it comes to things like NCAA eligibility. That's not something that they recognize for scholarships and other issues like that. So suffice to say, this was a hard one. I do think what we're proposing here is the best possible scenario, both for high school seniors and for all high school credit-bearing courses. Is it perfect? Probably not. But we have yet to find a better scenario and think this will accomplish our ends as well as possible. I would, though, if Mike is on the phone, Mike Krause, look to him to talk specifically to in terms of the Hope Scholarship. He and I have had extensive conversations about this and have appreciated his partnership and his insights from the higher ed perspective when it comes to this decision point specifically as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That Mike Krause, Tennessee Higher Education Commission, and Student Assistance Corporation Our agency serves a dual function, and I'm fortunate to be part of both teams. I would just want to say from my perspective as an ex officio member of the board, but also my official role as the TSAC director in full support of this approach, I think a few details are important to remember. One, every student has the opportunity to qualify for the Hope Lottery Scholarship, also based on an ACT. And so if there are those that are very concerned about a GPA effect, obviously the ACT provides another pathway. I would also just say that the Hope Lottery Scholarship parameters that were set out in state statute when the program was built are focused on the full breadth of a student's academic experience, which is about 8 semesters of high school. And I think the action before the board today is about the last 6 weeks of what would have been a 4-year experience. And I think that is a helpful perspective to have here. Finally, I would just say in its most extreme concern would be that a student would somehow not qualify for the Hope Lottery Scholarship due to this. I would remind everybody on the call and everybody listening that in Tennessee, financial aid takes many forms, and the Hope Lottery Scholarship is one scholarship program. In fact, every student can qualify for Tennessee Promise regardless of academic merit status. So just want to thank Dr. Hayburn and her staff for the thoughtful way that they have approached this. And I think that we have arrived at a place where we will begin as soon as the board takes action, communicating this to students as they reach out to us about financial aid opportunities.
Thank you very much. And I just want to say I appreciate the many ways you've looked at this in the multiple considerations and how, as Dr. Morrison, you said at the beginning, local flexibility, superintendents and local school agencies, they know best what the people in their areas need and have great levels of creativity and ingenuity that they get to utilize, and yet providing guardrails. And most importantly, guardrails of clarity, but guardrails that also give opportunity. And I think that was what I was most happy to see in this, is that it doesn't penalize, but it gives opportunity. And I just want to say thank you, because that is a very hard thing to look at the breadth of our state and the many different counties and many different schools and be able to find, while imperfect, I think the best approach given the philosophy of the flexibility yet consistency. So thank you both for that really hard work.
And this is Lillian Hartgrove. I also want to say thank you so much to you, Mike Krause, because I think it's so critically important to put things into perspective, because it would be easy to just look at things on the face of what we are talking about today without delving into and remembering the things that you brought to our attention today. So thank you so much for that. Somebody else was trying to speak, I believe.
Yes, to this Gordon Ferguson. I just wanted to echo Nate's comments. It just appears to me that in a relatively short period of time, a lot of work has been done looking at this from different perspectives. It's certainly a situation that none of us have had a lot of experience with, nor really have enjoyed dealing with, but it looks like there's been a very nice balance here of dealing with the situation that is before us. One question that I've got is, and I think I know the answer, but just to confirm, we don't see any issues with what's being proposed here today being impacted if the current date of the schools being closed is extended beyond that date. Is that correct?
Gordon, this is Sarah. That's right. I think, even if schools were to resume for several weeks at the end of the year, most of our schools typically close by the end of May. There would be very little opportunity to finish out in any meaningful way the semester, particularly for our high school students. So these rules attempt to be flexible, knowing that we don't know yet whether schools will resume for a little bit or not this academic year, but they certainly cover the fact or the possibility that schools will not resume.
Okay. Thank you, Sarah.
I just want to point out, I think there's a lot of wisdom in that. And again, thank you. That gives room, in my opinion, for a reconvening if that is allowable for social, for emotional, to celebrate seniors, to celebrate those who are, in those milestone places of schools, for teachers to get to see their students again and everybody to be together if that ends up being possible. But it also takes into account the level of trauma that I think everybody has experienced in some degree, just where normal routine has changed. And so saying these extend past, even if students were able to return, I think that's a great act of kindness towards both, I think, the faculties and the students of those schools. So thank you.
Thank you for those comments.
This is Daryl. I have one question. How do we, and this the timing may not be right now, but how do we begin to assess how a prolonged distancing experience impacts the upcoming or the next school year?
Daryl, this is Sarah. I think that's going to be the million-dollar question. In many ways, while the team that I am privileged to work with, the state board, has done some great work, I think, to get us to this place, this will in some ways be the easiest part. I think the harder work is still ahead in terms of, as a state, imagining what learning looks like when schools do resume, and how do we attempt to make up the ground that's been lost in many cases across the state in terms of learning time. So, I know as state board members, you all, as Lillian said at the beginning of the call, stand ready to come back together to help figure those things out. But I think there's going to need to be a lot of national conversation, statewide conversation, additional stakeholder conversations to help kind of figure out the next series of decisions that will come before the board. Certainly it's on my mind, and I think, at 3 p.m. today, we'll turn our attention not just from the business of today, which is closing out some of the things for this academic semester in a way that's good for students and teachers, but really thinking about how we can re-engage in a meaningful way when they come back together in schools, whether that's at the end of this year or at the beginning of next year. So don't have an answer for you on that right now, but certainly it's on our minds, and as a board, we'll be wrestling with that at our meetings in the next few months.
Thank you.
Sarah, thank you for those comments, because Sarah and I have actually had conversations about this, and there are so many unknowns, and we do not know when the executive order would be released and what the summer will bring forward to us. And again, the conversations we hear from Dr. Fauci with the CDC about what may happen in the fall. So these are all excellent points and things that we absolutely need to be preparing for in the event that the fall does not look much better than it does today. But we're going to be hopeful and optimistic that it will move in that direction. But by the same token, we're strategizers, we're planners, and we have to do our due diligence in making sure that, as I said earlier, that we do stand ready to act accordingly. Are there any other questions or comments with regarding item 3, these emergency rules?
This is Nick, and this question is for either Sarah or Amy. Can either one of you speak to this year there will be no LOEs, no level of effectiveness for teachers. What will that look like for next year, as far as what would evaluations look like, the issue of tenure, licensure advancement, all of those issues?
This is Amy.
Yeah, Amy, I was going to say, once you start, and Angie, I know you have some comments you can make too in terms of the tenure question specifically.
Yes, absolutely. And just a friendly reminder to please mute yourself if you're not currently speaking, as we're getting a little bit of feedback. Thank you. In terms of observations and things like that for next year, schools would likely rely on teachers' LOE from the prior year to determine how many observations to conduct in the 2020-2021 school year. Some of your other questions were about tenure and licensure advancement. I know Angie has some commentary on tenure and the potential for waivers in conjunction with the department. Angie, would you like to jump in there?
Sure. This is Angie Sanders, General Counsel for the State Board. One provision of Public Chapter 652 that passed that gave us the ability to promulgate these emergency rules also included a provision allowing the local education agencies to submit a request for a waiver to the commissioner, which would then have to be presented to the state board for approval. The issue around tenure is something that I have been in close communication with Chrissy Ballard, the General Counsel at the Department of Education, about as an issue that we've identified as something that LEAs will likely want to request a waiver on. I think that we have thought about this in terms of being handled similarly to how it was handled in 2016 when there was also a lack of state assessment data where districts would be allowed to use the prior 2 years of an educator's evaluation since there wouldn't be one in the most recent year. But that is something we are in close communication with the department on, and there will be additional information coming out about how districts can request waivers through the department hopefully soon.
Are there other questions or comments?
Yeah, this is Larry Jensen. In terms of future thinking, as a part of our consideration, I hope we'll add the impact of the digital divide in both rural and urban settings and the broadband issues that impact a lot of our kids right now. The inability to access and not even have in areas where they can go to get broadband. So hope that's on the future thinking, the post 3 p.m. thinking. Then I had a couple of questions on what's the impact on dual enrollment in terms of career and technical education, and also in, how does that work? That seems to be a gap, or maybe I just didn't hear it.
Absolutely, Larry. This is Amy Owen. Dual enrollment classes are those that are offered by a post-secondary institution such as a community college or technical college or other post-secondary institutions that high school students may take either at their high school campus or at the post-secondary institution campus. Those classes will be following the guidance and requirements of the relevant post-secondary institution. If you're talking more generally about career and technical education classes that are just at the high school that are not dual enrollment, I believe the Department of Education is working through guidance on how those pathways will work so that students who are working through a CTE pathway are able to have the knowledge and skills they need to move on to the next level. That will be likely more in the area of instructional programming guidance.
And then one follow-up, how does GED fit in all this?
In Tennessee, we use the HiSET exam as our high school equivalency exam, and it is administered through the Department of Labor and Workforce Development.
Okay, thank you. That's all.
Okay.
Other questions or comments? Then we are ready to move for a motion. Is there a motion to approve item 3A, COVID-19 emergency rules as described and documented?
This is Bob Eby. Yes, so moved.
Motion from Bob Eby. Is there a second?
Larry Jensen.
This is Nick, and I'll second.
I heard two people at the same time. I believe I heard Mr. Jensen first, who provides the second. Any further discussion? This is a roll call vote, so Mr. Griffin, please call the roll.
Mr. Cobbins.
Aye.
Mr. Darnell.
Aye.
Mr. Eby.
Aye.
Mr. Edwards.
Aye.
Mr. Ferguson.
Aye.
Mr. Jensen.
Aye.
Ms. Kim.
Aye.
Mr. Morrow.
Aye.
Madam Chairman.
Aye. So the ayes have it and the motion is approved. Thank you all. Thank you, Ms. Owen and Ms. Sanders. Thank you for the Department of Education for working so closely with our staff as well as the Tennessee Higher Education Commission. So let's move in now to item 3B, English as a Second Language Policy 3.207.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is Amy Owen, Director of Policy and Research for the Board. This item proposes changes on first and final reading to the English as a Second Language Program policy. These changes are necessary in light of the current public health crisis. Specifically, it updates criteria for provisional identification of students who are potentially of a non-English language background, which is a federal designation and a requirement that students are identified within a specific time frame. Options for service models for serving English learners to include virtual learning, and exit criteria for students who are not able to complete all components of the WIDA assessment this spring. It indicates steps that districts may take to exit students from ESL services based on available data. The Department of Education is working on more detailed guidance and support for districts in this area. The policy is setting up the parameters and giving them the authority to do so, so that students who need ESL services are appropriately identified and served, and those who may be exited can move into transitional EL status.
Amy, when is the guidance expected to be completed and issued to the districts?
I don't have a specific date. I know that the department has been working very quickly in anticipation of this item being voted on. We do have Jan Lanier with English as a Second Language Programming at the Department of Education on the line. Jan, do you have a specific date or approximate time frame available?
We have the draft completed, and we are planning on working on the training next week. So
Dan, I think you trailed off. I think you said you were also working on the training. I missed part of that conversation.
We have the draft of the guidance ready, and so
Great.
we just polish it up, and then we're also planning some training that we can deliver online to the district, hopefully by the first week of May.
First week of May. Excellent. That's great news. Great news. Thank you. Are there other questions or comments for Ms. Owen? Is there a motion to approve the changes to policy 3.207 in light of COVID-19?
Ms. Warden Ferguson, I'll move for approval.
Mr. Ferguson provides the motion. Is there a second?
This is Mike.
Mr. Edwards provides the second. Any further discussion? Mr. Griffin, please call the roll.
Mr. Cobbins.
Aye.
Mr. Darnell.
Aye.
Mr. Eby.
Aye.
Mr. Edwards.
Aye.
Mr. Ferguson.
Aye.
Mr. Jensen.
Aye.
Ms. Kim.
Aye.
Mr. Morrow.
Aye.
Madam Chairman.
Aye.
Madam Chairman, you have 9 ayes.
The ayes have it and the motion is approved. Thank you. Let's move on to item 3C, Uniform Grading Policy 3.301.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is Amy Owen. The Uniform Grading Policy 3.301 establishes consistent criteria for student grading statewide. One specific component of this policy is recommended to be adjusted based on the public health emergency. Specifically, students taking advanced course offerings such as advanced placement, dual enrollment, statewide dual credit, international baccalaureate, or Cambridge courses are required to sit for the appropriate culminating assessment for those courses in order to obtain additional weighting on their GPA. Due to the public health crisis, many of these exams are not being administered or are being administered in different formats this spring semester. So the proposed change is to allow students to have the additional course weighting without sitting the culminating exam specifically for this semester. I'm hearing quite a bit of feedback that I know is going toward the public line as well. So just a reminder to mute where possible.
Are there any questions or comments for Ms. Owen?
Yes, Madam Chair, this is Bob Eby. I've got just a technicality. If you look at the last sentence in the first paragraph, it says the changes outlined in this version of the policy that shall become effective for students in the 2018 graduation cohort. Obviously, this is not effective to that graduation cohort. So I'd like to offer an amendment. I've got some input from Mr. Krause too to make sure this is okay with the higher education. But I would like to amend that sentence to say is the changes outlined in this version of the policy became effective for students in the 2018 graduation cohort, except for Section 2, Paragraph 3, which applies only to high school students enrolled in the spring 2020 semester. One reason I think that's important is that there's some discussion that people may come back and look a few years down the road, what were the graduation requirements that they had when they graduated, et cetera. So I think it's important to have that distinction. So that's my proposed amendment.
We have an amendment so you are making a motion to amend the opening paragraph in this particular policy. Do we have a second to the motion?
This is Mike Edwards. I'll second.
Mr. Edwards provides the second. Is there any discussion? Okay, the amendment requires a roll call vote. Mr. Griffin, would you please take the roll?
Mr. Cobbins. Mr. Cobbins.
Aye.
Mr. Darnell.
Aye.
Mr. Eby.
Aye.
Mr. Edwards.
Aye.
Mr. Ferguson.
Aye.
Mr. Jensen.
Aye.
Ms. Kim.
Aye.
Mr. Morrow.
Aye.
Madam Chairman.
Aye.
Madam Chairman, we have 9 ayes.
The motion is approved to amend the document as outlined by Mr. Eby. Now we need a motion to approve the changes to policy 3.301 as amended. Is there a motion to approve?
Bob Eby, so moves.
Mr. Eby provides the motion. Is there a second?
Second, Darrell.
Second.
Mr. Cobbins provides the second. Any further discussion? Mr. Griffin, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Cobbins.
Aye.
Mr. Darnell.
Aye.
Mr. Eby.
Aye.
Mr. Edwards.
Aye.
Mr. Ferguson.
Aye.
Mr. Jensen. Mr. Jensen. Ms. Kim.
Aye.
Mr. Morrow.
Aye.
Mr. Jensen. Madam Chairman.
Aye.
Madam Chairman, we have 8 ayes.
The ayes have it and the motion is approved. Thank you. Moving on to item 3D, Charter School Local Education Policy 4603.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is Tess Stovall, Director of Charter Schools for the State Board of Education. Today I present to you on first and final reading an update to the State Board's LEA policy 4603 on promotion, retention, grading, and assessment. As a reminder, the State Board of Education is an LEA for its 3 authorized charter schools. And so this policy only impacts those 3 schools. As you can imagine, districts across the state are making adjustments to their policies and procedures given the current school closures, and this policy is doing the same for our district. So you'll see 3 key changes to this policy. The first is around student promotion, and just stating that one of our charter schools shall consider progress on an individual promotion plan of a student prior to school closure in making any promotion decisions. With regard to student retention, that the schools cannot retain a student for factors directly related to school closure,
and that schools may consider any positive progress that a student made during any distance learning activities that the school is providing during school closure. And then finally, codifies that given there are no CCAP or end of course exams, currently that removes the requirement for those being in grades. And I am happy to take any questions at this time.
Are there any questions? Hearing no questions or comments, is there a motion to approve item 3D?
Larry Jensen, so moved.
Mr. Jensen provides the motion. Is there a second?
Nate Morrow, second.
Mr. Morrow provides the second. Any discussion? Mr. Griffin, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Cobbins.
Aye.
Mr. Darnell.
Aye.
Mr. Eby.
Aye.
Mr. Edwards.
Aye.
Mr. Ferguson.
Aye.
Mr. Jensen.
Aye.
Ms. Kim.
Aye.
Mr. Morrow.
Aye.
Madam Chairman.
Aye.
Madam Chair, you have 9 ayes.
The ayes have it and the motion is approved. Thank you. Moving on to item 3E, Educator Licensure Rule 0520-02-03.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members. This is Amy Owen. Our final item today is on final reading, and it is the same version of the licensure rule you just voted on for emergency reading, less the section on director reporting requirements. That is staying only on emergency basis. But the other components of the rule we know are going to need to be in effect beyond the 180 days of emergency rules. And as the educator licensure rule was already on first reading at a previous board meeting, we are able to bring it to you on final reading at this time. So the timeline will go that the emergency rule takes effect as soon as it's filed with the Secretary of State and is in effect for 180 days. The permanent rule will be moving through promulgation at that time, getting a full review from the Attorney General, being posted online by the Secretary of State for 90 days, and then take effect as the emergency rule expires. We anticipate that at future meetings, such as our quarterly May board meeting, we will be bringing back portions of other emergency rules that need to go on permanent basis as well. This is one that we were able to prepare in time for this called meeting, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Questions or comments?
Amy, this is Bob Eby. I do have a question. So the permanent rule, which I'm really glad to see move forward, is, I think shortage of teachers is the biggest challenge we have. But it does contain the rule that we're passing on emergency. It will stay in the permanent rule, or does that get pulled out, or what happens there?
That's a great question. I'm happy to answer. I know Angie can also weigh in on rulemaking. The emergency rule is in effect for 180 days. That is what the board just approved on item 3A. This item is the permanent rule that will be running in promulgation while the emergency rule is in place. So this permanent rule takes effect as the emergency rule expires. And Angie, please correct me if I misstated anything about promulgation there.
This is Angie. No, that's correct, Amy. The provisions that are also contained in the emergency rule in section 0.15, which I believe is what you're referring to, Bob,
yes.
We determined need to remain in effect on a permanent basis because they will be needed beyond the 180 days. Once all of this is behind us, we can certainly revisit this section of the permanent rule and take it out when it is no longer effective or needed. But we do want that to remain in place beyond the 180 days, so it is included both in the emergency rule and the permanent rule.
Thanks for the clarification.
Other questions or comments? Is there a motion to approve Educator Licensure Rule 0520-02-03?
This is Nick Darnell. I so move.
Mr. Darnell provides the motion. Is there a second?
Ms. Gordon Ferguson, I'll second.
Mr. Ferguson provides the second. Any further discussion? Mr. Griffin, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Cobbin.
Aye.
Mr. Darnell.
Aye.
Mr. Eady.
Aye.
Mr. Edwards.
Aye.
Mr. Ferguson.
Aye.
Mr. Jensen.
Aye.
Ms. Kim.
Aye.
Mr. Morrow.
Aye.
Madam Chairman?
Aye.
Madam Chairman, you have 9 ayes.
The ayes have it and the motion is approved. Before we adjourn, I do want to take a few minutes to thank a number of people, so please bear with me. Very rarely do I thank the board members, but I do want to acknowledge your work and your due diligence as we prepared for this meeting, in particular in light of what we're dealing with COVID-19. I do want to give special thanks to our State Board of Education team, headed up by Dr. Sara Morrison, and of course our partners at the Tennessee Department of Education. We simply could not do this work without you, and we value your partnership. Also, the Tennessee Higher Education Commission and the great work of collaboration with Mike Krause and his team as we work through some of these other rules. And the many education stakeholders across the state who work very closely with us on the emergency rules and policy changes as they were being made. So, working together is always critically important, but it has never been as important as it is during this time of uncertainty. So thank you so much to everyone. You have my gratitude and sincerest thanks for everything that you've done. I do want to call on members of the board if there are any closing comments that you want to make, and Dr. Morrison in case she has something else to say as well. Anyone?
Madam Chair, this is Mick Darnell, and I would like to echo your thanks to everyone. This has been a first time for all of us to go through this. And one other thank you that I would like to share is with the multitude of individuals across the state, from teachers and staff and community partners who have really ensured that our students have been taken care of by serving food, by sending letters and making phone calls, and for teachers who have transitioned from paper to online learning. These people are heroes. And so I just wanted to share that thought.
I am so glad that you said that, and we should all be incredibly thankful to the educators that are in the field. I witness it here locally in my district, and so what you're saying I know is true across the state, and we cannot thank them enough. I think that there's people who perhaps did not have as much of an appreciation for educators to the level or degree that we all know they deserve, I think now more than ever have a greater appreciation. My own daughter, who is homeschooling her children, also working with the districts because they're offering Zoom classes, has said, Mom, this is just not for me. Homeschooling is not for me. So I know there's a lot of incredible appreciation for teachers, and more so than ever. So I'm thankful that you shared those comments, Nick, so thank you so much for that. Anyone else?
Yeah, this is Larry Jensen. I wanted to thank the superintendents in particular. I've had the privilege of calling them when all this began to unfold, just to hear their dedication, and especially around the feeding, getting kids fed. I was really moved by that. And then, so you sort of covered that, but I want to specifically comment on that. And then I did have a question asked about teacher licenses for those who were on waiver. We may want to answer that when we reconvene at the next time, if it's not able to be answered right now.
Larry, this is Sarah. I would just say, those waivers are year-long in terms of validity, and so they would be rolling off. But I do think, as Amy shared at the beginning of the call, the fact that ETS, one of our key partners in the licensure assessments, is able to offer those assessments remotely for teacher candidates now. I think that will help a lot of people who are on waivers, who are trying to move off waiver status and just need to take that licensure assessment. But we will look into that, and if there's anything more for candidates on waivers or teachers on waivers that we need to take care of at our May meeting, we'll come back together on any issues that we find there. So thank you, and to the superintendent who provided that.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you for those. Thank you for those comments. Anyone else?
Yes,
I just
Madam
like
Chair.
to just encourage.
Go ahead. Go ahead. This is
Bobby.
This is Nate. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Bob. I'm stopping. No,
Okay, let's call on Bob. Do you want to go first? Let's go with Bob, and then
Yes.
I believe that was Nate afterwards. I believe.
Okay. First, and I suspect I probably speak for most, if not all, the board members, certainly don't like to make the significant changes to the requirements that we've made today. But I think, obviously, as we all said, these are unprecedented times, and but we don't take. We've heard today. Oh, yes. Can you not hear me?
You were breaking up.
Oh, I'm sorry. What I said is I don't think that any of us take these decisions lightly, and we do appreciate all the inputs that we've received from whether they're superintendents or legislators or students or whatever. And I know we all look forward to the time when we can get back to normalcy, but our focus, I think, is shown here again today, is on the students and the student learning. And I do want to thank our staff and everyone who has provided input to that as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Those are great comments. Mr. Morrow?
Yeah, I just want to affirm what everyone is saying. And the thing that is the most encouraging is to see how restrictions have been moved to open up space and for students to be helped. And I think it's just been fun to see the heart of educators across the state look for all the different ways they can serve. They really have been amazingly collaborative and creative, and all the things we talk about teaching in 21st century skills, like watching people live those out as educators in the way that they serve, in the way that they've cared for, the way they've checked in on their kids, the way they've fed families, met basic needs, and provided educational services at the same time has been really exciting and encouraging about, how we do move ahead and the possibilities that are out there for creating greater access and greater opportunity within the state of Tennessee for education. And while no one would ever, it's been a terrible situation everybody's been in, but it has forced levels of change and levels of creativity and levels of thinking outside the box. And that I think is going to, if we, like Dr. Morrison said, use these things as we go forward in the way that we all work together and share ideas and share best practice and create good feedback loops, right? Doing something you've never done, you need to have feedback in. And so it's just, while I'm very thankful for the great work that we've done, it also, in a way, excites me for the future accessibility of education in the state of Tennessee for all kids. And that's really due to the wonderful superintendents, teachers, building administrators, parents, and community organizations that have all stepped forward in this. So I just wanted to thank everybody who was a part of that.
Excellent comments. Thank you so much. I echo everybody's comments. They're all just right on point. Anyone
Madam Chair,
else?
this
Yes.
is Daryl Cobbins.
Yes, Daryl.
Well, of course, would like to echo the sentiments expressed by my colleagues in thanking, our staff, the department, everyone across the state, at the districts. But I also want to just ask us as a body and all of those who've been involved in the solution-making process heretofore to not lose sight of those students who may be not typical or who may not learn in the traditional sense. I think at a time like this, those students with special needs are even more vulnerable in the sense that, online learning and some of those things that come easily for typical students. Parents have often relied on the education system, not just for instruction, but also for the services that the public education system provides to those students. And right now, I think districts are doing the best they can, but, those services are probably not able to be provided in the typical manner that they have been. And so, as we think about education and as we think about students and the impact of this entire situation, I just want to make sure that we keep that most vulnerable population of students at the forefront of our mind and be thinking about them in ways to make sure that they can advance as well.
And Daryl, I appreciate those comments, and I don't know if what I'm going to say is relevant, but I do know that the Department of Education, Commissioner Schwinn in particular, did form a partnership, and maybe you all have heard about that, with public television to offer classes online. And so if anyone has a TV, or even if I believe some of it is actually online, but I know we talked about having challenges with access to broadband and those kinds of things. I know that in a lot of rural areas of this state that sometimes PBS is the only TV that they can have access to, and it's with an antenna and not with a cable company. So I mentioned that just to say I'm not really sure at what level and if it covers special needs students or not, but I think that's something that does bear looking into and determining if it can be a tool that is utilized right now for students with special needs, in particular for families of students with special needs. So I just wanted to mention that. So,
Thank you, Mr. Coppins.
Any other comments? The last thing that I do want to share is our next quarterly meeting is scheduled to be in person in Nashville on May the 29th. Of course, that is contingent upon our ability to do so safely. So it's my hope that we'll be able to meet in person, but Sarah and I have certainly been talking about what would our plans be and what would that look like if we're not able to meet in person. So I do also want to say to each of you, I wish you all exceedingly good health and that you continue to stay safe, especially as you shelter in place. I'm sure that you are all doing that. And so without objection, we are adjourned. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.